Yeah. So if you could, so go ahead and introduce yourself, Josh. This is Brandon Roberts, of course. And this is our Exercise and Nutrition Journal Club. And this week we'll be going over a paper on a pre-workout. So yeah, Josh, you want to tell us about who you are, where you're from, what you like, stuff
Yep.
like that?
My name is Josh Hockett. I'm currently in Madison, Wisconsin. I am the tactical strength conditioning director for the 57th Rescue Squadron over in Aviano, Italy. Strength conditioning, performance nutrition, specifically strength conditioning with military populations is kind of my forte and my background. I have my master's degree in kinesiology from UW La Crosse. And then I'm CISSN from the International Society of Sports Nutrition, which is where the study comes in because supplements that enhance performance is an area of interest that I've had for quite some time. So that's why I'm excited to cover this study today.
Yeah, for sure. And supplements are such a big industry now. I don't remember the last numbers, but it's like, so I just got one the other day and I was like, I wonder how this compares to the studies, and it's pretty close. And I'm sure you have tried a bunch of different ones over your career. And I know I have. But let's go ahead and get into this study, and maybe if you want to give a brief outline or just an overview, and I'll fill in the gaps if we have any.
Yep. So the big take home to get the perspective of this study is that basically we've got from beginning to end, we've got 16 recreationally active males went through the study. They recruited a few more than that, but 8 went through the experimental group and 8 went through the placebo group or the control group. And what they did is for 4 weeks, they resistance trained on a strength training program that was supervised and set up pretty well, in my opinion. We'll get into the details on that, but it was a good strength training program, recreationally active males, average age of 22. Stats that were given, they were, nothing out of the ordinary for being, overly big or muscular or really lean or anything like that. Recreationally active, I believe it was about 3 years of resistance training experience. They trained 3 days a week for a total, I believe it was 16 strength training sessions. The experimental group got Bang energy drink every day for the 4 weeks, including off days. And then the control group also got a placebo, which was flavored almost exactly so that way they could tell the difference. And they took it the same way that the experimental group did. They looked at hemodynamic factors like blood pressure. They looked at some microRNAs, basically transcription factors that would be a predictor for different measures of anabolism. They looked at performance measures in strength, and then they looked at cross-sectional area and hypertrophy. And the outcomes were actually pretty impressive. If you look at them at face value for what they were, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but what I have here is basically total body mass went up by about 3.19 kilograms in the Bang group and 0.44 kilograms in the placebo group. So that's a pretty big difference. Lean body mass went up by 3.15 kilograms in the Bang group, or about 5.9% improvement. And it went up by only 0.89 kilograms in the placebo group, or about 1.5% improvement. Again, we're talking about 4 weeks here with 3 strength training sessions a week for 4 weeks. So these are some pretty rapid and high magnitude outcomes we're looking at, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Performance standpoint, we had the group taking the Bang energy drink. Their squat performance went up 23.86 pounds, or a 16% gain. And the control group went up 14.2 pounds, or about 10.7% increase. For the bench press, the Bang group went up. Let's see, what do I have? The Bang group went up 10.7 pounds and 4.8 pounds in the placebo group. So the overall magnitude in increase in bench and squat in the Bang energy group or the experimental group was 34.38 pounds at 4 weeks. Just so if you just think about this, and we'll get this as the takeaway, if you could go up 34.38 pounds in your bench and squat in 4 weeks, that's pretty good. I mean, that's outstanding, really. Even in the placebo group, they went up 18.7 pounds in the 4 weeks, which we'll get to this later. But sometimes I just think being put on a strategic strength training program that's supervised alone can actually provide some pretty good outcomes with recreationally trained subjects that might not be on a well-implemented strength training program to see these kind of adaptations. And how you define recreational can often determine the ceiling of adaptations that a group can get. And again, we're talking about 16 people overall here in both groups combined.
Yeah.
So we started out with 10 in the bang group, 9 in placebo, 8 ended up getting through attrition and just some dropouts. Both groups had plus or minus about 2.4 or 2.9 years of experience, respectively, between the bang and the control group. Let's see, neither group was allowed to take supplements 1 month before their testing, pre and post. This, they could, including specifically protein, multivitamins, and caffeine. They took their supplements 30 minutes before their placebo, their control, 30 minutes before training sessions. And one unique factor was that the squat that they used for testing pre and post was the Smith machine squat to a 90-degree box, which I thought was kind of interesting. It was not a free weight squat. The bench press was a flat barbell bench press, which was the typical bench press you would use. But I just thought it was interesting that to control for variation, they did use a Smith machine box squat. Now, granted, if they use the same thing pre and post, at least you're controlling for that. But I think most of us that train in general in the gym, powerlifting, weightlifting, bodybuilding, probably use a free weight squat. But nonetheless, they did see improvements in this version of the squat. Let's see, anything else that I wanted to get in there? So the big thing is that over 4 weeks, these two groups, the Bang Energy group saw significantly greater adaptations in strength and muscle hypertrophy and changes in lean body mass and total body mass in the group that did not take it. So if you look at it from the big picture, it looks like Bang Energy Drink is a viable performance enhancing tool for those variables, and there were no detrimental effects on hemodynamics like blood pressure. So it does lend some credibility at face value that it looks like Bang could be a well-selected, or as they call it, multi-ingredient beverage, or pre-workout as we call it, for people to use that are looking for these kind of adaptations to augment their strength training performance. I'll let you go from there, Brandon.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight a couple things. That was really good overview. So they call these basically pre-workouts. They call them MIPS, so multi-ingredient pre-workout supplements, and they've been around for probably 20 or 30 years, but they're just kind of starting to be able to accumulate a lot of the research on these. But the main problem is none of them are made exactly the same, right? And so one of the things they did in the discussion, and I did a bunch of research kind of in the past couple hours, is they tried to compare their findings to other MIPS. Now, I will say, based on kind of the scientific evidence of pre-workouts and all these individual ingredients, they pretty much are in the ballpark with uh, efficacious doses. So they have the right doses. They're not underdosed at all. With the main one being kind of the creatine, right? So that was one thing I noticed, is citrulline malate, which is kind of novel, but not so much novel anymore. Beta alanine is 2.5 grams, and then a good bit of caffeine, so 350 mgs of caffeine.
If you don't mind, my Brandon, I think that's one unique piece is we've seen studies in isolation looking at BCAAs, looking at citrulline, looking at creatine, beta alanine, and caffeine by themselves in isolation, enhancing performance. And at least with this product, they've got all of them in there at efficacious doses. So that does lend some credence towards why we would see some improvement in the variables measured, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And then just kind of to round out their training program is a 4-week program, not too long. Average training programs are 6 to 12 to 16 weeks if you're lucky, in studies anyway. And so they had the first week was 2 sets, pretty standard upper lower split, honestly. And the second and third weeks were 3 sets, and the fourth week was 4 sets. And so, I mean, honestly, I thought the training program was pretty standard, so I wasn't concerned with that. The other thing that they did have a placebo, right, which is super beneficial. Even So they said they tried to make it taste the same, but I'm betting some of these recreationally active people have had pre-workouts, and they probably knew whether or not they were getting the placebo or the pre-workout. And I don't know if that matters that much, um, especially with what's such a short study. But this same
Right.
group published a paper not too long ago with the bang, and basically they found that people could do more reps acutely, so they had higher muscular endurance. And so this is the chronic study. Um, and so they have a little bit of data in there, but it's nice to see, because you seldom see it, the kind of safety markers. They're like, hey, your blood pressure didn't go through the roof, or hey, your heart rate's not 160 the whole time, which some people just anecdotally kind of react like that in the gym. And so that's kind of nice to see just
Mhm.
within the study, because it's super easy to do. Um, Okay, so I did want to touch on, for people who are just interested in learning how to kind of interpret research, on the randomization of this. So when we think of randomization, we think of simple randomization. In big studies, you can just randomize people with a computer or a program generally, or a dice or a pack of cards or whatever. It's usually simulated now, to each group, right? You kind of, it's random, so if you have enough people, you can get enough in each group.
Mhm.
But smaller studies, especially exercise science studies, like you're looking at 16, 20, 30 people if you're lucky, they have to, and they often don't say this, block randomize people. So they'll take, you know, random blocks, or sorry, they'll take blocks of like predetermined placebo or bang, and they'll randomize people to each block, and then they'll kind of move the block away. And this makes sure that you don't have 10 people one group and six in the other, right? Because
Mhm.
that wouldn't work out. So I just wanted to highlight that like little thing, for those who may have not noticed. Now the other thing that I wanted to highlight, so you highlighted all the performance outcomes, was the kind of physiology side, right? And that's the miRNAs. Somebody, or actually Jason in the group, said something about it.
Yep.
He's like, hey, you're going to talk about that? I was like, well, I mean, I've actually isolated microRNAs from blood and muscle, so yeah, let's talk about it. They harken back to this powerlifting study, D'Souza ish, 2018, and basically the purpose of that study was try to figure out, okay, which one of these microRNAs are um, used or can be used to identify people who powerlift compared to just controls. And in idea, that was a kind of a neat study, but it was just a basal study. It was just like, these people do this thing and these are controls. So here you have a training study, which has a lot of opportunity. Um, but honestly, when you look at their results, they like to compare it to the other powerlifting study, but they didn't really measure the same stuff. So microRNAs, there are tons and tons, and like, it's probably like 1,000 or 2,000 by now. But in muscle, we have microRNAs, which are called myomeres. And some of these kind of the popular ones are miRNA 1, 133, 206, 208, 486, and 499. And they have like A and B forms. But what microRNAs do is they can control kind of different processes, whether that's catabolism or anabolism, like you talked about earlier, and they can modify the transcription process, right? So we have DNA gets turned into RNA, RNA goes out, and now it's mRNA, right? So it's floating around your cell, whatever cell it is. These microRNAs can then attach and degrade the RNA signal before it gets made into a protein. So that's one way to regulate protein synthesis and things like that. It's just like, oh, you never actually got made into a protein, so you don't really exist. Now I can do a lot of other things, but that's the basic kind of knowledge for now. So they looked at, I can't remember. So yeah, like 15, mere 15, 16, 23, 12, 18, 320, and 361. None of those were really significant. The only ones that popped out were mere 23A and B, which kind of fit with the literature. So basically, mere 23A and B are in inhibitors of catabolic gene expression. So they stop stuff from breaking down muscle. Now, if those are elevated, that's probably more of an artifact of them just training. So that I don't know what time point these biopsies were taken at. That plays a really big role in signaling, and it just wasn't in the paper. So they talk a lot about it, but there's not really much ado about kind of the mirrors in this paper. But that's okay. It's definitely data that somebody else will use and compare to. So I'm glad it's there. I'm just like, that's kind of disappointing. So yeah, so that was kind of it for the physiology type stuff that I wanted to cover. But I guess we can,
Do you mind if
everybody's
I jump back for 1 second? I forgot to allude to one fact, and I'm sure you saw this too. I did make one error. It was 4 days per week that they trained, 2 upper body days, 2 lower body days for the 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So if you've got 4 times 4, that's where you get the 16 sessions. Again, very general program that just increased volume over time, fixed rest periods. It was supervised. They went for as many reps as possible, took sets as close to failure as they could. And there was a little bit of supersetting involving, probably for time constraint purposes, but nothing very complicated or fancy as far as training, very straightforward. The diet was also controlled for, to the extent that a 3-day diet recall was done immediately before physical performance testing. And then 3 days, the last 3 days of the study, they also did a 3-day diet recall and did not find significant differences between either group in calorie intake pre-post or macronutrient distribution differences. They did not find differences. You could say, oh, well, one group underate, one group was overeating, one group had more protein or less or whatever, and attribute that to the gains. Not the case here, because based on the 3-day diet recall, depending on how much credence you put in that, it's better than nothing. It did not look like there was a difference in that either, which lends more credibility to the fact that the one variable that led to the differences they found was the Bang energy drink.
Yeah, and they weren't eating. So these are pretty big guys, 80 to 100 kilo dudes, and they're only eating about 100 grams of protein ish, 100 to 120, somewhere in there. So they're not eating a lot of protein either, which
Well, and even their calorie intake was right around 2,200, 2,300 at the highest. Was recorded was 2,400. That's, for guys their size, that's not a whole lot of intake, honestly. But that's based on self-reported 3-day diet recall, and we know how inaccurate that can be sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I also kind of wonder about, so we can kind of jump into the limitations and stuff and just kind of free talk for a little bit. But I also wonder about their training status. I know you talked about that earlier, but it's like the range was 1 to 8 years. So it would have been wonderful to see individual data points and just say, okay, well, the Bang group, everybody just responded really well, and the placebo group, everybody kind of just stayed the same, because you would expect some growth, but not that much as the Bang had. So did you have any limitations or kind of things that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, again, how we define recreationally trained, and I think just again the size of the group, we're looking at 8 people that finished the study, both the control group and the experimental group. So to make huge generalizations from there, I think is a big step. Body count being done by DEXA, that's fairly accurate, so we can see that there. And then I also wonder what kind of sensitivity each group might have had to something like a pre-workout. Some groups are, as they say, responders, and some groups just don't get very much from it at all. That's one thing I kind of wonder about, or if it was 1 or 2 particular ingredients within this pre-workout that are really to attribute towards the outcomes, or maybe it truly was a synthesis of all of them, where it was kind of a 1 + 1 = 3 versus 1 + 1 = 2 type thing. Caffeine with creatine, with beta-alanine, with the BCAAs. That's left to be alluded to yet as potentially further study, if it was the combination of all of them, or was it just 1 or 2 of the ingredients within it that did it.
Yeah, and I looked up the kind of like average effect of creatine because I was like, all right, creatine, water retention, some people respond really well and kind of blow up, and it's about 1.5 kilos. So that makes me a little less skeptical of these monstrous findings. I'm like, all right, well, they compare it to some other MIPS that are kind of similar, and then they've got a lot of creatine in there, and they have this new creatine that I, you know, had one paper published on it. It was this cretyl L-leucine. It's
Yeah,
called super
super cool.
creatine. Yeah, and there's one rat study with it, and I looked through the study, and it was basically just a safety study. So nothing really big there. But yeah, I think you could go out and individually pull these things and kind of cross them off scientifically. But as an athlete or a coach or whatever, like if everything helps 1%, there is probably some type of synergistic effect, especially because it's dosed really well. Um, Not that I've ever tried it, but I might have to after this.
Yeah, this is just me. I'm a monster guy, the sugar-free monsters, but I'm curious just to compare it with, try a bang for myself and see what happens. But I will also say within the limitations, this study by itself would seem to lend that it does work when taken daily for 4 weeks. But as a coach myself and somebody who's just going to use my own experience with someone, I'm not going to say go take this. You always want to use trial and error with these kind of things. Maybe try like a half dose, because the last thing you want to do is go before a big performance or some kind of big training session, and for the first time take a full can of any energy drink and find out you're jacked out of your mind, or you get anxiety, you get heart palpitations. Everybody reacts a little bit different. So just because it worked in the study doesn't mean everybody should run out and go get it either. I would titrate the initial use of something like this if you've never taken it or tried it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm like a caffeine junkie, so I know the caffeine and the beta alanine
I'm
wouldn't do anything.
I'm
But
I'm with you there.
so there's one thing they could have done that really would have helped their case. That I think if we saw big giant differences, we would be like, okay, that makes a little more sense. And that's if they just had training volume, whatever, however you want to measure it, doesn't really matter. If they had like, okay, if they are going to failure, which I I wasn't sure if they were or not, but if they were, then if we saw these monstrous difference in training volume, that would help us kind of understand that they're doing way more volume. They're not really trained well, like you said, probably, and they just did twice as much volume. But we don't have that, so I'm kind of still a little hesitant, but um,
That's actually a good point. I didn't even kind of think about that. To almost this could almost overshadow the importance of a good strength training program. A lot of people work out, but they don't train. And I'm just going to be really technical with it, where they go in and I'll do some arms and calves a day, and then the next day I'll do some back and some abs. They train or they work out, but are they on a strategic, progressive resistance training program? For the first time maybe ever, yeah, they've worked out for 3 years, whatever, but now they're training where they've got a weekly fixed set of volume, an order of exercises, reps, going to failure, rest periods. It's being supervised. That alone can induce some pretty big adaptations when that's all being measured, tracked, and laid out in a training plan, not just I'm going to go work out.
yeah, yeah,
Perhaps that is partly, or by and large, some of the gains, because even in my professional experience, I've had people who have trained for many years, and when they finally get on an organized training plan, they get some of the best adaptations of their life right away without changing anything else. So that could be part of it too.
yeah. I definitely agree with everything you said there. So I guess we'll kind of wrap it up a little bit, but what would your next steps be, or what would you like to see next? Just based off either Bang or another pre-workout or whatever. Just kind of like spitballing.
Yeah, I would say, kind of going off what I just said, is having recreationally training groups, or maybe even have more train groups. Also get the drink and without it, to see what magnitude organized training has on the outcomes with or without the pre-workout. I would like to see that. That way you can tease out the factor of being on a training program, going from recreational and kind of random to formally organize training with or without the pre-workout. I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, and you could just add in like, so every study has, a funding type of limitation, but
Mhm.
if it was double the length, maybe you see some of these changes come a little closer together, or further apart. Like maybe they, I don't think they would double. If they doubled, I'd be super skeptical. I'd be like, what are you putting in the bang? But yeah, so I think the only ingredient that I don't see in this that I'm starting to see in pre-workouts, and I think there's a couple studies being published like right now. The only ingredient is beetroot powder. Um,
Uh,
so that's
yeah,
very famous in endurance kind of studies. Almost all endurance athletes are on it to some extent. But
yep.
there's a little bit of data starting to come out now that it can help resistance training. I actually had a pre-workout with some in there, and it tastes like dirt. I mean, I can handle it. It doesn't taste that bad, but it has a very distinct taste. Um, so I think that's the only thing you could really add to this mixture to really add any benefit. I would
Yeah,
also, go ahead.
I do have to say, I think just based on my own individual research and use over the years of products, this does have the big heavy hitter ingredients that are notable for enhancing performance in the variables tested at the dosage found to be efficacious. So I have to say it is a well designed product.
Yeah, for sure. I have no idea how expensive or cheap it is, but I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not cheap. Um, and let's see what else. So yeah, I don't. I would like to see maybe a couple different measures of muscle size. So if you're telling me Dex is telling you this, maybe just do some ultrasound or a bod pod or something to just kind of support that measurement a little bit. Um, that would be nice to see. They had,
I did mention, but I was wrong on that. They did not do any cross-sectional muscle measurements or like tape measures, anthropometrics,
yeah,
to
yeah,
see did their arms grow, their chest grow, their legs grow. They didn't actually measure any of those, and maybe there's reason for that. But maybe in a additional study in the future, that is something that can be looked at. Actual just anthropometrics. Did they gain measurement increases in size in that regard? Because obviously, for gaining total body mass, it's going somewhere.
yeah, for sure. And they didn't really like recomp per se. Like neither group lost a bunch of fat mass or anything. So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, they mostly just gained lean body mass. So that was kind of cool. But okay, so I guess that's pretty much it for the study. I do super appreciate you coming on. So if we wanted to find you and on the internets, where would we find you, Josh?
Yep. On the interwebs, best places to find me is probably on Facebook, just Joshua Hockett, Hockett. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at muscles n, the letter n, morsels. And then I'm also on LinkedIn as well. Just my name, Josh Hockett, is where you can find me.
Nice. Well, excellent job. We will wrap there and stay tuned, guys, for the next Journal Club. Thank you for listening.